It is no easy thing to make sense of the world today. We live in a time where just trying to put one foot in front of the other can be both difficult and confusing. So many of the categories, things that were once considered normal, relationships like parent and child, man and woman, understandings of race and nationality, identity itself, these things are changing fast in our culture, faster than we can even make sense of or keep up with. Who am I? That's the perennial question of our culture. Of course, that doesn't mean there's no answer. Christianity does give us answers. God has made known to us not only who He is, but who He's made us to be. And that's why I want you to join us May 21st to the 23rd for the Wilberforce weekend. Join all of us at the Colson Center in an exploration of what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. The event is being held at the stunning Omni Resort in Fort Worth, Texas. You can engage speakers who are both thinkers and doers, that are writers and laborers, teachers and preachers. And we've called all of these folks together to help us frame out the answers to this perennially important question. One of the books that I found most helpful and intriguing this past year is the book, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. We've talked a lot on Breakpoint and other Colson Center outlets about kind of the new Gnosticism of how we see what it means to be human, that the body is evil or is irrelevant or can be completely remade and redefined according to our deeply held beliefs or impulses or desires or something like that. All of this is critical to the conversation that we're going to have at Wilberforce weekend in May about the image of God. As we've said over and over, the image of God, a fundamental belief for a Christian worldview and an essential component for cultural witness, our cultural witness today. Pleased to have a conversation here with Professor Orlando Carter Snead. I think if Professor Snead, if we had an award for like Dick Vitale does for the all name team at Wilberforce weekend, I think you'd win that contest.
Well, you got to throw in the fourth. I'm the fourth. Orlando Carter Snead the fourth. That adds even more gravitas to the name.
No, that's huge. I'm looking at the Notre Dame page here, and you don't have the fourth on there.
No, it would be too much for Notre. It would overwhelm the website. I didn't want to do that. So
you don't want to overwhelm anybody.
No,
you don't want to intimidate the university.
You got to be humble in this world. And so, and I grew up in the South, and so so what we normally do is we have a first initial O, and then you go by your middle name, which was probably somebody's last name in the past, and that's I go by Carter. But yeah, my son goes by Orlando. He's Orlando Carter Snead the fifth, and so he's even better than I am.
Oh man, that's fantastic. Well, that's great. So we can officially announce you can call him Carter at Wilberforce weekend. But he is one of the world's leading experts on public bioethics, and that really is how we create public policy and regulations and an understanding around issues of science, medicine, and biotechnology. He's the professor of law at Notre Dame University, and again, the author of What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics. I had you on the podcast, the Breakpoint podcast, a couple months ago, and just had a remarkable conversation. But when I thought about this year's theme, about the image of God, and moving, as we're going to do on Saturday, from creation, what did God intend for us to be as human beings, to the fall, how has the fall distorted our understanding, and cultural sin changed our way of seeing what it means to be human. And then when we move to the redemption part of it, we're going to look at the issues surrounding incarceration, issues surrounding race, issues surrounding suicide and mental illness. And we're going to look at issues around bioethics. Carter, it's really astonishing what technology and science is allowing us to do and how far behind our ethical considerations are.
No, that's right. I mean, just the other day, I saw an article about how a scientist is exploring the possibility of combining the genomic materials of monkeys and people and trying to create intermediate species that are hybrids or the chimeras among different types of animals. We deal with questions, I'm used to dealing with pretty easy questions about killing and dying, and when everybody agrees what we're talking about is a human being, even if they don't think they have moral status. We're talking about unborn children. But now we're going to be talking about things involving beings that we haven't ever really grappled with, to try to classify and understand what it is and who it is we're dealing with. Creating brains called cerebral organoids outside the body that are structurally and functionally active without a body? We've got a lot of very hard questions coming down the road, and we have to get the fundamentals right. Which it's such a encouraging thing that your program has got such a beautiful framework, the Wilberforce weekend, with all parts covered, the whole landscape covered, from beginning to end. It's what we need right now.
Well, listen, you were a no-brainer not only because your book just takes this issue and locates it in the image of God, but because you think so clearly on a philosophical level about what it means to be human, and then apply it to this issue. But I think some people think that even with the stories you just threw out about chimeras and so on, well, that's what the scientists are doing in the lab. But we have reached a point where we're making some astonishing decisions about when our lives should begin, when our lives should end. We're just not far away from designer babies, things that are going to be upfront and personal questions. And we haven't even covered things like in vitro fertilization and surrogacy within the church. By and large, I mean, these are not issues for the scientists in the labs. These are everyday ethical decisions everybody's making.
No, these are people going to church and trying to do the right thing, and they want to be parents, and they're confronted with this universe of possibilities, and they have not, because most normal people haven't thought about it. How do you think about the idea of sex selection? How do you think about the idea of using technologies that circumvent the usual natural selection process of egg and sperm for purposes of fertilization? How do you think about, as you say, down the road, gene selection or gene editing possibly, or screening for certain kinds of traits that aren't connected to health or that are connected to health? You want a child who has blonde hair and blue eyes? Do you want to have a child who has perfect pitch? You want a child who's a donor for an already existing child for cord blood? These are hard questions. And as you say, we got to get to the fundamentals of what it means to be human, and what it means and what we owe to each other, especially what it means to be a parent, what it means to be a child, what the relationship among the generations are, rightly understood. Before we can even start talking about that, when you have people who are vulnerable and desperate, and they feel like their bodies have let them down, they want to be parents, and they have no idea how to do it, and it couldn't be a more potentially fraught situation.
Yeah, that's right. Tell me a little bit about the subtitle of the book, because I know that's such a key, is this idea that we live in a culture that doesn't take the body seriously. Of course, as Christians, we believe this is part of natural revelation, right? This is general revelation. What God made tells us about God. So God made our bodies as part of what it means for our humanness. How is the body being denigrated, and why does it matter?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I would even add to that Jesus became incarnationally a
Right.
human being as well, which tells us something deeply important about the meaning of our embodiment. But so you're exactly right. The book seeks to make the case for the body in public bioethics. The argument I make is that as we think about laws and policies that relate to science, medicine, and biotechnology, we have to think comprehensively and accurately about what it means to be human. And everybody knows that, and the temptation that a lot of people fall into is to associate our humanity strictly with our cognitive capabilities, to think about ourselves as kind of a ghost in the machine, and the body is instrumental, and relationships are instrumental, and it falls into this anthropology, which I describe in the book as expressive individualism. But if we think for a moment about the arc of our lives, we realize that an essential feature of our identity and our flourishing is the fact that we are bodies. We are fragile, corruptible bodies in time. And that means that we're vulnerable. It means we're mutually dependent upon one another. It means we're subject to natural limits. And that means we need each other. That means we have to take care of each other. We need to take care of our neighbor, love our neighbor the way we love ourselves. And that's an insight that flows from our situation of shared and mutual dependence as part of God's creation.
So, Carter, as you know, Carl Trueman will be with us. He's talked about this idea of how our culture misses the image of God with this idea of expressive individualism. One of the things that I think is so helpful about your book, and so counter to the way we make medical decisions, certainly how we're making decisions about things like gender transition surgeries or things like that, which I put all of that in quotes because it's not an accurate description of what really happens. But this idea of expressive individualism, that I'm not responsible to anyone else, that everyone else is responsible to respond to my own imposed definition of myself on the world. The world has to obey, gravity has to change, everything has to change. One of the things that you bring out in your book, which I think is so helpful, is that being made in the image of God is essentially a relational reality as well. We're not just, autonomous, isolated, atomized, beings. We actually are in deeply held relationships. But man, that flies so much in the face of modern culture.
No, it's really true. It is the antithesis of especially American culture, where we have this notion of the rugged individual, and you imagine yourself as as you are now, at the height of your powers, cognitively, capable, able to impose your will in the different spheres of your life. And, Bertrand de Jouvenel, the French philosopher, said about certain social contract theorists, something that applies to this as well. It's like childless men who forgot that they were children. Or it reminds you of Satan's speech in Paradise Lost by Milton, where he denies his creaturely status before God, saying, I don't remember being created. I don't remember being a creature. All I know is that I'm here now, and I have power now, and I'm going to use that power. And so at the core of expressive individualism is this kind of reductive, very temporary view of what it means to be human. It doesn't take on board all aspects, the challenges, but also the gifts of what it means to be a human being. And if you try to ground American law and public policy relating to bioethics or anything else, you're going to miss entire categories of our brothers and sisters, people who are cognitively disabled, people who are in the womb, people who are elderly, and so on, even children, just newborn children or even very small children. Expressive individualism can't give an intelligible account of what they are, such that we have to understand what our obligations to them might be.
I hope that gives folks kind of a sense of the journey we're going to be taking at the Wilberforce weekend, starting on Friday, talking about the embodied part of being male and female as in the image of God, and kind of an intensive conference before we launch out and try to make that case for the image of God being central to a Christian worldview and central to our cultural witness. It has been historically. We're going to have a great talk by Rebecca McLaughlin to talk about the role that the image of God has played historically in making the case for Christianity to a culture that is doesn't know what it means to be human, and then walking through that creation, fall, redemption thing on Saturday, culminating with sessions like yours, where we try to really apply this and dig deep. And I can imagine, Carter, I think that when you and I talked on the podcast, we went on and on and on, and I felt like we could have gone on and on for another hour, because bioethics has long been an area of interest of mine, but we also talk about so many areas that the church fails to catechize, young marrieds in. I mean, there's no sense of ought when it comes to, or God's created design when it comes to reproduction. Procreation is a better word. Having children, having families, the roles of families in society, and it's just one thing after another. So I'm thinking you're going to whet our appetite on Saturday, and we're going to want a lot more, and I hope people will pick up your book. So many of the bioethical issues in American culture. I mean, you named the chimera issue. We could talk about CRISPR, and so many other things, not to mention the everyday decisions people are making, for surrogacy, choosing intentionally sterile unions and then demanding children as a right legally. So much of this seems out of the bag. Like, is it even possible for Christians to have a distinct, definitive witness when we're so far down the tracks on denying our humanity?
Yeah, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think that hope is an important virtue, and I think that Christians can do this by virtue of prophetic and really countercultural witness. The idea of living the gospel the way we're called to do in ways that are shocking and surprising to certain kinds of modern sensibilities, but not just in terms of living according to the right understanding of what it means to be a human being in terms of our own choices, but also in our service to other people. And insofar as we serve our neighbor and care and love our neighbor unconditionally and seek to care for others without seeking anything in return, I think that provides a shock to the system. I think that's exactly what our culture needs, and I think that's what's going to. And which again, the choice of topics that you've chosen for the Wilberforce Forum. You're talking about incarceration and racial equality and justice and these others. It's all one thing. It's all one thing that it comes back to being made in the image and likeness of God. And Christians have a special way of talking about it, but more than talking, living it out in a way that can transform the hearts and minds of our brothers and sisters.
Hey, I appreciate that answer so much because I'm convinced that we, Peter Berger said modern man has a permanent identity crisis. And that's the problems we see around us. The good news is the image of God's the best answer on the market at every level. Like, it matches reality, not to mention it explains more about the human condition than anything else. The Wilberforce weekend is coming up soon, May 21st, 22nd, 23rd at the Omni in Fort Worth, Texas. We're heading towards capacity. We still got some room left, but it's going to be a big crowd. And we're going to have a good time again on Friday during the day. We're going to lock in on the issue of being male and female in the image of God. One of the first things we learn in Scripture about the image of God is that it's male and female. Genesis 1:27, of course, a very contested issue in the culture. Then Friday evening, we're going to really lock in as the image of God being kind of that source or that fundamental belief of a Christian worldview, or one of the fundamental beliefs, and a central aspect of our cultural witness. And then Saturday, we're going to walk through the biblical story, creation, fall, redemption. What did God create the image to be? How has it been distorted and misunderstood in a fallen, in the fallen human heart and the fallen culture? And then what does it look like to live restored in these very important issues for culture? And then, of course, Saturday night, honoring Bob Fu, Pastor Bob Fu of China Aid, with the Wilberforce Award for his courageous leadership on behalf of the persecuted church in China. It's going to be a full weekend, Carter. I'm so excited that you're going to be there with us. I'm so grateful for your book, What It Means to Be Human. And in fact, let me give the subtitle again because it's just money. The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics, a Harvard University Press publication from last October. So excited to have you as part of the Wilberforce weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in Fort Worth.
Well, great. God bless you and your work, and I look forward to joining you. It's a real honor.
Wilberforce Weekend has always been and is about equipping Christians, equipping you with the clarity, confidence, and courage you need to live out what is true in this cultural moment. The Colson Center is also offering the Wilberforce Weekend online. This is a virtual conference that will be released in the month of June. You can engage with the entire content of the Wilberforce Weekend from your own home. And better yet, we'll have special sessions that are online only, that will only be specifically for the virtual attendees. Join us at the Wilberforce Weekend, and let's work together on what it means to get the image of God right and to join in God's restoring work.